Hey, my name is Beth. I am an independent author and I happen to make my own book covers. I get a lot of questions about them and I am working on a cover for my new book, so I thought I would record it and talk a bit about the process. So I'm working on the third book for this series and I'm going to be using the same style of typography for all of the covers to make them consistent. So that's why I'm starting with the cover of book one and just redoing the title text for right now. This helps me keep the text consistent in size and color, shape, placement throughout all of the books. So The Assassin's Bride was book one. The third one is going to be this, The Artificer's Wife. And you can see I've changed the text and now I'm just using the brush tool to draw some highlights back onto the text and make it nice and shiny. So now I'm gathering up my sample resources for what I might use to make the cover. This is my mock-up stage where I've gone through and I've picked some things that I like for the characters, for the backgrounds, and I'm just kind of pasting everything together really roughly to figure out if the elements that I've chosen work together the way that I want. So these are just demo, like sample images. I get all of my stock images from deposit photos. At this point I am masking off the background. This lets the characters be seen layered against each other, lets me know how the poses are working together. I'm not too worried about making it look good yet, it's just really rough. I had a hard time choosing a pose for the male character, and when you look at these, you might notice that these are 3D rendered characters. They are not photographs, and that's something that I was not originally planning on doing, but they're what I liked the best on the first cover, so I've kept that consistent through the rest of the series. I really like this tree background, so you can see I'm kind of playing with the colors by changing the hue and the saturation and adding a glowy layer in the background. And when I check the characters against the other background options, I'm just not really happy with them, so I'm going to go with my instinct and get that first one. After I have chosen the character models that I like and the background that I like, I buy the full versions of each stock image, and then I repeat the process of like putting them together, masking the characters. Somewhere in here I had a clip get lost because my program crashed. I use an older version of Photoshop, which means sometimes it's not super stable because it's not really made to be used on a computer as new as mine. But it's just a matter of repeating the process, like placing the characters and then masking everything off. And I could not for the life of me get the quick select tool to work, so I ended up switching to the magic wand. And I usually go in and just like really roughly select the gray background on these. The artist that I get a lot of my 3D models from always puts them on this gray background, and I kind of wish that she would put them on like a white background so that it would be easier to isolate them, but that's okay. It just takes me a little bit of extra time to go in and clean up around the edges. And here I am going in and erasing part of the mask that has not masked very nicely, but I use the Refine Mask tool on the hair to catch all the little ends of her hair and make them more transparent. I do a little bit of cleanup with the airbrush on the mask, and I'll probably clean that up a little bit more later on. But right now it's just a matter of, trying to get the edges to look decent. I use a mix of hard and soft edged airbrushing to get the look that I want, and there are going to be some places that I will inevitably miss and have to go back and clean up a little bit further. So here I am erasing the gun that she's holding because I'm going to replace that with a sword. There are not guns in this fantasy romance series, so that is not appropriate. But she is the first warrior woman to appear in this story. Here you can see I'm using the polygonal lasso tool to select the sword. And then doing some more cleanup on the hair. Overall, this cover took me about 2 hours to make, which is not bad, but some of that work is front-loaded. By that I already had the typography done, and I already had the graphics like the leaves and such that go behind the title text. Because I already had those, I didn't have to waste any time making it. It was really fast to put everything together from those pre-existing elements. Here I have duplicated the sword from the other hand and pasted it on this one, and I am using the clone stamp to rebuild the sleeve behind it so that I can get rid of that gun handle. And I toggle it on and off a few times to make sure that it looks the way that I want. And I think it's good enough, and I don't think it's super noticeable that it's the same hand. It blended pretty well, so I'm pretty pleased with that. So here I'm replacing the artwork for Rillian, who is the male lead, and it's kind of funny because I title his layers Rillian and hers are just heroine, because at this point I'm still writing the book and I have not chosen a name for her. I know I want him to have the book somewhere in his hands, but I'm not sure where, so I have copied it to its own layer and removed it from the layer that he is on, and I'll just kind of shuffle it around for a while until I figure out where is a good spot for that. So this is more mask cleanup for Rillian, going in and tidying up the edges of the fabric and cleaning out like around his hand. This model was a lot easier to clean up than hers was. I didn't like how the hair masked. It did not do a very good job that time, so I ended up going back in and redoing it manually. I use a graphics tablet for a lot of this. I do very little by mouse. I also do digital art. I use a Wacom Intuos 3, which is a much older tablet. You can get it really affordably, but I've been using that thing for like 15 years now, and it has never let me down. I use a layer set to overlay to add straight black shadows on places that I want to be a little bit more intense. And then I use a soft light layer with like a red-orange tone to airbrush in a little bit of glowing light between and behind the characters. And I'm going to play a lot with that light that is around and behind them, but some of it'll stay, some of it'll go. I'll go back in and refine some of it, erase things, change the color. A lot of my work is just fiddling, and at some point in there I decided I was not going to redraw the sparkles, so I copied the sparkle effects that I had drawn on the first book's cover, and I just pasted those layers in there, flipped them over, and changed the hue and saturation of them to make them blend into this cover a little bit better. Once again, that's something that, it's like I'm recycling elements that I have used before. I add some heavier shadows around the outer edges, and at some point I noticed that I did not mask out this part of her sleeve, so I go back in to clean that up. There's always at least one place that I forget to go back and clean up in the mask. So what I'm doing right here is applying a high pass filter to a duplicate layer and setting it to overlay to create sharp lines on the model. Then I can go back to the first layer and run a diffuse filter on it to make it look a little bit more painted. And that helps cut down some of the uncanny valley effect that the 3D rendered characters have. I really dislike the expression that this model has, so I copy his face to a new layer, erase the edges so that I don't have to worry about blending anything, and then I am going to grab my clone stamp and my airbrush and start drawing over the top of his face to make him look a little bit nicer, a little bit less sneery. I really like the set of his eyebrows, but I want him to have a more closed mouth. So I duplicate the mouth and kind of move the lips one by one to close his mouth a little bit, and then I will paint over it using some textured brushes to help preserve some of the texture and feel that the rest of the image has. And that's a nice difference. There I am correcting the color of his eyes. I play a lot with blending modes on the different layers to get the effects that I want. There's some things about her face that are bothering me. She looks really plastic, so I'm going to be doing some fixing on her as well. There I'm changing the color of her eyes, drawing in some more highlights, and then I am smoothing out a few weird lines in her face that just really bothered me. Because of how unnatural she looks, I decided to go back in and paint over the top of her face with a textured brush. This is going to make her look less real, more painted, and it's going to really soften some of that really strange plasticky look that she has. I mostly use just like one or two textured brushes, and I use the smudge tool to blend it together. I add a lot more texture to her lips because they looked particularly fake and were bothering me a lot. And I'll kind of sharpen up a few lines here and there around her eyes. But on the whole, you know, it doesn't take a whole lot of time or effort to make her look a little bit more like a painting and less like a Barbie doll. Sometimes when I zoom out, the shadows don't work out quite the way that I want, so I'll go back in and blend them a little bit better or make them sharper. Here I've deepened the shadow under her face, and I really like the way that changed the depth of her neck. It looked a little bit too shallow before, and I think that was part of why she just didn't quite look real. I added some more color to her chest as well, just to make that blend a little bit better. And then I am giving Rillian the same treatment, even though he does not look quite as artificial as she does, probably because this model has a lot more skin texture. He just needs a little bit to, you know, make him mesh with her so that, you know, they have a little bit of my fingerprint on them, just something that helps them mesh. And then it's time to add swirlies. I'm using some kind of an effect brush that I got from some artsy pack called Lazy that I downloaded many years ago, and I wish I knew where it came from, but I legitimately don't. I get the effect that I want with the magic by making like 3 copies of the layers and setting them all to different blending modes. Each one set to a different blending mode adds a little bit of something special to it to really add a lot of depth to the glow. I add some highlights using a big soft airbrush and adjusting the layer mode to overlay. That brightens up the points of focus, which I want to be their faces, but it also helps me bring things like her leg and his hand like more to the forefront. His hair already had some of that orange glow on it, so I use some textured brushes for drawing hair to go in and add some of that lighting to her hair as well. And then it's time for the always fun addition of rim lighting. I sampled some oranges out of the background, and I am just drawing those on there to simulate lighting around the edge of her model. I add a little bit to him too, but he does not need nearly as much rim lighting added as she does because the model already has a little bit. I draw these with a really hard airbrush, and then I'll run a blur filter on the whole layer at the end of everything to soften it up a little bit. I wasn't real happy with the intensity of the rim lighting on the swords, so they ended up getting played with a little bit more, put on their own layer, brightened up a little bit. I feel like I spend a lot of time duplicating layers and changing blending modes just to be sure that things really pop the way that I want, with minimal effort. I've decided at this point that I want them a little bit more centered, so I select all of the layers that have character artwork and I scoot them over a little bit. He needs some more swirls around the back of the book now to fill in that space. And I think that is looking good. So yeah, this was a really simple photo bash style book cover. There's not really anything special to it. You could probably achieve a lot more using a newer version of Photoshop. I use CS 5.5, which is now quite old, but it works for me, so I have no reason to upgrade. This book will probably be out sometime this fall. I don't have a specific date set, but I'm looking forward to sharing it with you, and I hope you liked seeing this cover process. Take care, and I'll see you soon.